The End Times by Mark Time. The End Times, Paul muttered while watching his late-night news program. The TV sat at the end of a long, dark living room. Paul sat in a tattered recliner next to a coffee table with the ashes of last week's cigar. The stale smell made little impression on the man as he leaned forward and gripped the arms of the chair. On the wall to his right was a photo from when he went on that shooting trip with his prepper group. To his left was a plastic cross hung on the wall. He purchased it many years ago at a big box store. Paul couldn't bear to look at the label on the back. He knew where it was made. It's gotta be. Paul shook his head as the news anchor detailed the new round of geopolitical turmoil. Gog and Magog, the 70 weeks, the tribulation. On the shelf beside the TV was a stack of Bibles in various states of neglect. At the bottom of the stack was the ancestral King James copy passed down from his grandfather. As Paul progressed in his life, he graduated from its stodgy and cumbersome language to the modern translations. Sharing the shelf with the Bibles was a slew of books about prophecy. A man of middle age now, Paul was a product of his time. He came to the faith in the late 80s and was immediately swept up in a tidal wave of dread. "The End Times," Pastor Bill warned. "I have it on good authority that the Soviet Union will kick off the war of Gog and Magog and make their move against Israel by 1995. A much younger Paul would listen, wide-eyed. "Is it really happening in my day?" He would shrink in terror. "I guess I should hold off on that proposal." As 1995, the Soviet Union, Pastor Bill, and his last chance at love left Paul's life, he still remained convinced. "It's the rapture any minute now. Prophecy must be fulfilled," Paul would entreat himself. Locked away in his home, the millennium loomed over the horizon. The man on the TV said that the computers would fail, the sky would fall, and society was on the verge of collapse. "The End Times," Paul would repeat this phrase as a lullaby. As his own life crashed around him, a small part of his innermost soul longed to drag the world down with him. New Year's Eve 1999 was spent hunkered down with the lights off. He clutched a member of his increasingly numerous gun collection. A sizable stock of ammunition sat dormant in the dark recesses of Paul's house, along with meals ready to eat and cans of non-perishables. "When the pre-tribulation times come, I'll be ready," he whispered to reassure himself as the seconds and minutes edged toward midnight. As the year 2000 blundered into the pages of history, Paul stayed up all night. The sun cracked the horizon's ramparts as much as it shook his foundation. Creeping his way over to the light switch, Paul took a deep breath and closed his eyes. The lights came on in an instant, but his mind remained in a dark despair. "I was sure it was this time," he thought to himself. The cascading visions he had of total collapse and ensuing violent chaos drifted further out of reach. Paul shut the curtains and turned off the lights for the rest of New Year's Day. He spent the day in reflection of the times he had spent when he was young. From the motorcycle trip out west to the hangouts by the lake, his life was different now. He would muse, "I was really wasting my time with that stuff. You can't live like that in the end times." After the passing of the millennium, a new vanguard of prophecy broke into Paul's mind. Islamic terrorism. How did I not see it? He marveled in wonder as the speaker at his church's prophecy conference warned of the new threat. "Mark my words," the speaker pounded the podium. "The Antichrist will be Islamic. Just look at who Israel's enemies are. Who else fits the bill?" He lowered his voice and leaned into the microphone. "And it's sooner than you think." The planes hit the World Trade Centers only a few months later. "The End Times!" Paul wrung his hand with a mix of emotions while watching the live coverage from a house that increasingly resembled a bunker. As the dust settled and the passports were found, he felt vindicated in his newfound beliefs. He was right! Paul was almost excited. The loss of life was tragic to him, but the adrenaline of knowing that he was selected to experience the rapture brought a wave of euphoria. Paul began to ignore calls from his aging parents as their health declined. "The rapture's coming soon enough. I don't know why they worry about these things." His father passed on the day the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, with his mother following only a few months later. If only they had held out a little longer. Paul wiped away the tears as they lowered his mother into the ground next to his dad. His phone rang a few days after the funeral. It was Louis, a friend he had made at the last prophecy conference. "Hey, Patriot." The Vietnam veteran always started his phone calls with a low, suspicious voice. "Louis, I can't really talk right now. I just lost my mom." Paul fiddled with the growing collection of apocalyptic literature on his shelf as he held the phone against his head like a gun. "I'm sorry to hear that, buddy," Louis consoled. "If only they had held out a little longer." His friend took a deep breath. I know. Did you see what Saddam is doing? I think he's going to make his move against Israel. The attack on the Twin Towers was just a distraction." Paul's mind began to race. "No, I didn't. What's he up to?" Once again, his nation went to war. He always skipped past the news stories about immigration, the drug epidemic, and domestic crime to get what Louis called the good stuff. Every development of the news brought more confirmation of what Paul already knew. "The rapture's coming at any time. Things are getting too crazy out there," he reassured himself as events got worse in tandem with his vanishing ability to adapt. "Hey, Paul," Louis called again. "I hope you're prepping for the big one." It would be months, sometimes years, between Louis' calls. Paul anxiously awaited them like a farmer straining his eyes to the horizon in anticipation of rain. It was not growth he craved. It was shrinkage. Paul yearned for the big one and its redeeming fire that would wash away his inadequacies. Iran is going to get the bomb soon. Bush's term is about up and this Obama guy is real friendly with the Islamics. With the economy being how it is, Louis droned on with an eschatological hush. "So how does this fit into prophecy?" Paul would inquire without wondering how it fit into the bigger picture. "It's the end times," Louis would reply. "The rapture is right around the corner." When the financial crisis heaved into view, Paul was certain it was happening this time. "When I'm taken up to heaven and everyone's left here for the tribulation, then they'll really be up a creek." He gripped the steering wheel as he drove past a cemetery. Paul stopped attending church about the same time he got what Louis called a real computer. With home internet and the host of human knowledge at his fingertips, Paul's withered faith in the rapture gained new life with 1,000 new perspectives. "Ah, there it is." He sat back from the screen after browsing various forums and prophecy news sites. "I knew this all fit in somehow. It's the end times." Paul emailed the article to Louis. His last phone call was a few weeks back. His friend's voice sounded weak and haggard as he decried the backsliding of the culture into, quote, the times of Noah. This postulation was always devoid of any plan to oppose it. "Why would you want to stop the end times? Things have to get worse before Christ returns." Louis wheezed into the phone. Paul was vaguely aware of the veteran's health struggles, but they both blithely brushed it off. He just needed to hold out a bit longer. A few more weeks passed until another phone call interrupted Paul's hand-wringing over Obama's second term and the Islamofascism he was sure to bring in. "Hello? Is this Paul?" a female voice greeted. "Yes, who is this?" "Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm Louis's daughter." Her voice buckled under thinly concealed grief. "I was looking through my dad's phone to find people to come to the funeral." She let out a few more sobs. "He was so private about who his friends were." Paul nearly dropped the phone. "What? What happened?" "All that smoking caught up to him," Sarah sighed. "I told him it would." His friend recalled how certain Louis was of his convictions. He thought that if anyone knew they were in the end times, it was him. "When did this happen?" Paul shook his head. "It's been a months-long process." The daughter took a deep breath. "He refused treatment for lung cancer. I thought you knew. I noticed there were a lot of outgoing calls to your number." She paused. "More than he called me." Sarah continued to lament the fact Louis sold his life insurance policy and reversed the mortgage on his home. Paul heard none of these things. Her voice trailed off in his mind. "None of that matters," he thought to himself. "And all we have left to sort through are a dozen cans of rice and a bunch of these old books. I don't know how we're going to pay off this debt," Sarah began babbling. Paul callously interrupted. "When's the funeral?" "Next Saturday," she stumbled on her words. He hung up the phone shortly after getting the time and location. Paul held the phone weakly in his hand, clasping it like a talisman. Pressing his bald fist to his chin, he took a forlorn glance out the window. In an otherwise clear sky, a solitary cloud sojourned eastward. Was he wrong? Paul gripped the phone until the plastic creaked. His gaze drifted to the stack of prophecy books. Brushing them aside, he took up his old appointment book. Somewhere along the line, he stopped writing things down. The utility of such things waned in the face of an apocalyptic showdown. Social functions, family reunions, dinner dates, and church potlucks faded from his appointment book inversely with his anxiety. The range of the book only spanned through 2009. Even still, Paul felt compelled to write down the date of Louis's funeral. Ill-attended, poorly organized, and underfunded, the funeral was a dour affair. A few old war buddies filed in the row behind Sarah and a few of her other siblings. Paul took up his seat in the back. When it came time to pay respects at the casket, he slipped out. He couldn't have been wrong. I just know we're so close. Paul yanked at his car door. He just had to hold out a little while longer. Squealing the tires out of the church parking lot, the aging man set his course back to the comfort of his own home about an hour away. On the country road stringing the various hollowed-out small towns together, he came across a sedan on the shoulder. Paul slowed down to peer inside. The car was totally abandoned. "There's no one there," he remarked to himself aloud. Driving on, his pulse began to skyrocket. The next town showed no signs of life either. A United Auto Worker post lay dormant next to a shuttered mom-and-pop hardware store. All the markers and trappings of a bustling little community were absent. The rotted carcass of town after town buffeted Paul's psyche like the incessant beating of the tide. Did I miss it? Paul checked the mirror for no particular reason. No! Did I miss it? Was I left behind? Where is everybody? His anxiety rose as mile after mile of country roads heralded no contact save for a few birds. Even the various farmhouses seemed to show no signs of life. Lord, please no! Paul cried out, craning his head to see in the window of a house marked with a little cross in the yard. He spotted a family praying before dinner. Relief washed into his mind, just as he blew through a stop sign. The impact was unlike anything he had experienced. His car took a roll after a savage T-bone hit from a semi-truck. After his momentum dissipated, Paul took a gasp for air as the smell of the airbag's explosive charge filled his airways. Looking down at his chest, he observed a large piece of metal debris sticking in it. Not yet, Paul writhed. I'm so close! By the time the emergency responders cut his seatbelt, Paul was already gone. They found him clutching the late great planet Earth to his breast. He was declared dead on the scene. If only he had held out a little longer, one of the responders remarked grimly as he surveyed the inside of the vehicle. What's that book he's holding? One of the other responders asked. The man shook his head. No idea. I would have grabbed that Bible in the glove box. His coworker sighed. Must have been a pretty important book to him. Paul left his earthly bounds with little to mark his passing other than a few life-altering injuries to the truck driver who hit him. The family he had craned his neck to see in his last moments witnessed the accident. After rushing out to the road, the father called the ambulance. The dust settled and the mangled vehicles were cleared away. Traffic resumed on that lonely country road as if nothing had happened. Daddy? The father's youngest daughter tugged at his pant leg. What happened out there? The man struggled to find the right words. There was a car crash. Did he die? The little girl asked with a trembling voice. Yes. Yes, he did. The words came slowly. His daughter's face dropped. Why? I suppose God just decided. The father nodded somberly. It was just the end of his time.